Hello, I am Ron Baker, and welcome to Empowered at Last. I am going to talk about a subject today that is a tender one, and yet it is one that we so need to understand more fully than what most people understand. I'm going to create, as we prepare to talk about how many people are feeling lost, more unsure about where their life is headed than ever, and not understanding why things have shifted so much from the inside out, why people are no longer feeling the same level of fulfillment from their old choices, why where they thought they were headed is no longer what appeals to them. I know this from my own life for sure. I know this from the lives of my clients. I pay close attention to what I hear people talking about, and if I know that a majority of my clients are talking about it, then it is likely going on for tons of people who don't yet feel safe to even talk about it or admit it. And yet this is a phenomenon that is going on. So I have huge compassion, and I have a whole lot of good news about what is happening and why it's happening. In order for me to go into this more tender topic, I'm going to be expanding on what I would normally go into in the podcast. Let me give it some foundation. I have often said in various teachings that we all have 3 levels of potential or 3 levels of consciousness. The wonder of child consciousness at the center of our beings, expanded out into the potential of empowered adult consciousness, and then expanded outward again into the greatness of soul consciousness. I've often stated that most people don't even realize this is the map of self. Most people don't even realize, even though the word child, adult, and soul may be familiar, most people don't realize that they haven't integrated any of the true potential of these 3 levels of consciousness. Why? Most people end up very trapped in wounded child consciousness from the first 8 years of our lives, where we needed 9 specific levels of nurturing, and when those were not present, we each ended up with a soul curriculum in the lifetime of certain challenges of fear, shame, and judgment. This has been the case for everyone I've ever taught, thousands of people around the world over the last 25 years. So this is something that we need to begin to understand, a map of self. And why have I not integrated the full potential of any of them? The first center ring is the wonder and trust of a child who had to be nurtured in these 9 specific ways, feeling safe, connected, affectionate, acknowledged, acceptance, compassion, clear guidance, support, and encouragement. Those are the 9 levels of nurturing. When we received these in a very clear, consistent way, we would have learned to trust life, to trust our caregivers, and most importantly, to align and trust self. Because we haven't done that as fully as we would like, we as a planet are not even experiencing the opportunity of the soul plan for our lives. What do I mean by that? Every lifetime is configured with certain challenges and certain gifts and opportunities. The gifts and opportunities boil down to your interests, your talents, your capacities. Using the gifts and the challenges Your soul has a way of bringing you to the focus that is truly important for your lifetime. Let me give you an example from mine. My father never said a single word to me that I can remember growing up, except for occasional orders like, go mow the grass. Not a single conversation. And because of that, my challenge put my focus so intently on the need and the importance of that nurturing guidance for me to even learn what it is to be a man in the world, a healthy man in the world, a viable, valuable man in the world. And when that didn't come, I put so much focus on it, and I ended up going on a journey to fill in the missing gap. What did this teach me? Tons more than I might have gathered if my father had been lukewarm and kind of invested in me. I might have settled for that. But because I didn't have it and my challenge was set up, I ended up focused on it like a big dog. And I went after it. I went after answers. I went after finding out, how do I get this clear guidance and what is missing? And that's what led me to discovering the 9 nurturing needs by identifying what I needed the most fully. I then have taught this to thousands of people around the world and found out how consistently everyone else has needed that level of nurturing guidance. So what did my challenge, using my interests and my capacity, my awareness to move toward filling in this gap, I not only healed myself, but I found my sense of greatest purpose to become a nurturing father figure. Not a replacement for anyone's father, but a nurturing paternal energy in thousands of lives. That's how my soul guided me from the beginning. Through my challenges, my interests, abilities, and talents, toward exactly what I needed to focus on. Pretty cool when you begin to identify the pieces, because it certainly didn't feel cool when I was going through the challenge setup. So, within all that, how am I going to tie this into why is my life not going the way that I thought, and what has this big interrupt? What has caused this big interrupt? Why is it here? Why do I feel lost and confused and in many ways, or for many people, a sense of not having any more motivation? I just don't care anymore. So let's explain a little bit more about the self. The child, the adult, and the soul. The soul is guiding the whole thing. The soul is the most sacred, deepest level of your individuality. Most people never become directly connected to their soul energy, but it is still like that little voice in the back of the head that encourages what you're ready for next. Everybody's at their own level. There are many different levels of consciousness as we grow through child, adult, and soul. And so when you're in first grade, you get the inspirations and inklings that you need that are perfect for a first grader. The same is true for a 5th grader and a 10th grader and a college student. You are ready for deeper levels of inspiration. Your soul also causes the energy to awaken in your body called Kundalini or sexual energy. At the appropriate times, that accelerates and awakens you into more potential, like what happened at puberty. When this happens, it also awakens more of your conscious awareness. I never noticed boys or girls before this, and all of a sudden I become aware of wanting more intimate connections with another person. This is an awakening of consciousness caused by energy that awakens within you. That continues to happen throughout life. And yet no one has really taught a clear map of life, a map of self, to understand how it all works, how it's attempting to support each one of us into more and more of who we are. Well, now let's talk about evolution. The planet's growth from one stage to another as well. The collective evolution of our planet. Well, you may not buy into the concept that the planet is actually evolving, but just like the awakening of consciousness inside an individual, when more energy moves and it opens us to more things than we paid attention to in a stage where it wasn't appropriate or where we were not ready, just like puberty and then adulthood awakens us into much broader focuses that we are ready to navigate, the planet also moves through these stages. Just look at collective consciousness. We moved from the Dark Ages, we moved into the Renaissance, we moved into the Industrial Age, this is just our most recent recorded history. We could add lots of ages and stages in there, the Bronze Age and the Iron Age, and so many different levels of awakening and awareness. These are stages of evolution. Well, if you pay attention, in the last 30 years, we have accelerated consciousness and technology and awareness and information and internet and so many things. In 30 years, we have advanced more fully than in thousands of years prior to that. That is coming from an awakening of energy, whether anyone has ever talked about it in these terms or not. So I'm giving some seeds about soul consciousness in today's podcast. That is not typically what I've used this for. I typically share more of this kind of thing on my Facebook Live, which is at a group called Empowered at Last with Ron Baker, the same name as the podcast, but it's only on Facebook. And those Facebook Lives, I have shared tons more of the soul perspectives. So if you're interested in that, please go and check it out. Empowered at Last with Ron Baker on Facebook. I digressed from what I was talking about, so my brain is trying to pull me back to where we were discussing. Why, in this soul evolution time that's accelerating so much, is it also creating such an interrupt where people are feeling lost, confused, unmotivated, etc.? Think back to a time in your life, such as, well, let's just go really primitive to begin with. When you were at a certain stage in your life, you were very interested in a pacifier and a mobile hanging above your crib. You were very interested in keeping diapers on. You were very interested in a certain scope of things. And then you began to awaken and notice other things and let go of what no longer served you. This was a simpler stage and a simpler time before you had become complex. But in the wounding of childhood, as you developed what was supposed to be a foundation for an ever-growing, becoming sense of self, we got wounded, all of us did, with various levels of soul, lessons and challenges that left us with impressions of fear, shame, and judgment. Because of those, we became very attached to who we had to be and what we had to do, and we became attached to an agenda. Let me go back to the example I already gave. My dad never said a word to me. I then, as I grew, felt so much invalidation and insecurity about my own value that the way I decided to use my gifts, talents, and abilities was by achieving in every way I knew how. I had an international career performing leading roles in opera and Broadway all over the world, hoping that my achievements would prove my worth and finally get my father's approval or anybody else's approval that became like my daddy replacement. That didn't work so well. And eventually, when I had done over 60 leading roles and I still felt like the same wounded child on the inside, I started admitting more and more and more to myself that this was not going to work. Now, a part of me said, I know, I'll go now to the television and movie industry, and I will create huge success on the biggest levels of glamour possible. Fortunately, my soul gave me the inklings in the back of my head, Ron, this is not going to make it any different. You've already achieved and had opportunities at profound world levels. You've been signing autographs for years. Did not make me trust my value. That can only come from an internal connection to self, learning to claim our own value, because what I didn't understand when I began my journey is that the soul setup of challenges brings us to a point of recreating them as an adult so that we can interrupt the pattern and transform it ourselves. We were always intended to become the authority in our own lives. No one ever gave us a clear map or this guidance, for the most part, unless you're someone unlike the clients I've been teaching for the last 27 years. The good news is we've begun to put more and more pieces together, and that's exactly what I'm offering. Ways to put more pieces together. So I hope you're already on that journey of putting more pieces together from all of the wonderful teachers that are out there in the world. But I know that what I'm bringing to the table is a clear map of self and an understanding of how to move through each of these 3 stages of consciousness. So within that soul journey, eventually, if we do not interrupt like we did as a child, oh, of course I'm ready to let go of the diaper and the pacifier and the limited toys so that I can open to more, and more of my consciousness is awakening and I want more. Well, if we get trapped in fear, shame, and judgment and the agenda of having to achieve and prove ourselves, we might never interrupt it. I'll give you an example of my business partner of 22 years who happened to pass away in 2013. He was resisting like a big dog, letting go of his career that he was in that gave him a sense of safety and reliability, in order to allow the expansion into all of this consciousness work that we eventually moved into, that I'm still continuing. Well, he had been the head of makeup at Lincoln Center for tons of years, and he was having nothing but success. And yet, when his soul, is a better way to say it, was ready for him to interrupt a level and an approach to life that no longer served him, because it was just going to keep him in the same limitations and keep him from growing, they fired him for no apparent reason. They simply wanted to move on and have a different approach and expand, most likely. He certainly wasn't in trouble, but they announced they were firing him. Your soul can manifest all kinds of things in order to interrupt your familiar. Now, I said the planet moves through certain levels of evolution, just like our individual lives are meant to do. When the soul is ready to interrupt your survival paradigm, your survival consciousness, it begins to penetrate with higher energy. The inklings, the awakening that says, whether you're ready or willing, more is possible. And in order to encourage you beyond the limits of your familiar comfort zone, we're going to dissipate this lower energy. We're going to disconnect your desire for limits that really don't serve you. And so by awakening this bigger consciousness, you don't get the same hits from the limited container you were in. Imagine that when you're in this little container, it's hitting the edges of it that excites your nervous system. And when I do that, and when I get away with that, and when I achieve, and when I get validation, it hits the edge of that, and I get a surge of gratification. That's the way that works. And then your soul goes up, expanding you into a much bigger container. It no longer hits the edges in order to interrupt our focus, in order to say that will no longer serve you in the potentials that are attempting to awaken. So if you have been going through feeling lost, confused, alone, no motivation. Many people have even said, I just want to kill myself. Nothing is fulfilling at all. Please hear, please hear that your own soul is attempting to awaken you into more. But you need guidance, you need tools, you need to understand the map of self that will allow you to free yourself in order to move into a level of fulfillment that is profound. Just imagine how much more fulfilling what you had known was than the levels of fulfillment you had as a 5-year-old. This same expansion into greater fulfillment is attempting to take place. But it does not feel good when you don't understand what's happening and you go into greater resistance, fear, depression, shutdown. This is one of the most important podcast episodes I have done. Please, if you need clear information, guidance, and support, reach out to me. Either email me, ron@ronbaker.net, or go to the website and look at the courses that are there, available for you to get weekly clear guidance and access to me directly to ask your questions. I have created these things because we are in a world of such need. Reach out, be proactive, take this in, see if it applies to you, and show up for yourself. I am here. I am a viable, nurturing, safe place for you to land and explore more of who you are and how to get to this next level with much more fulfillment. That's all for this week. I'm going to close with choose well, live fully, and by all means be good to you. Have a great week.